Hello everyone and happy old New Year's. As many of you have noticed, I did not record an episode last Monday. I'd actually taken the weekend off to celebrate Vasilitsa with some family and friends, and lo and behold, I ended up getting snowed in at an airport in DC. As much as I love you all, unfortunately I could not produce an episode live from an airport, but who knows, maybe next time. But nonetheless, here we are in the official start to the new year per the Julian calendar, alive and kicking with some great content for everybody. In today's episode, we will be discussing a question I get from a lot of people. That is, where do I get all this information that I use for my episodes? Am I secretly getting paid from Gruevski, who is in asylum and exile over in Hungary? Of course not. Over the years, I've amassed a respectable collection of Macedonian books going from ancient period to well into today. And today, I will be sharing one of these books with you. It's a book you've probably have never heard of, but I recommend you pick up and read immediately. You're watching Mario's History Talks. I'm Mario Rostovsky, and let's get started. On February 26, 1906, American adventurist and journalist Albert Sonnichsen was reported missing from his hotel in Woden. Relying on a letter that he sent to his newspaper dated the 16th of February, it was immediately determined that his disappearance and subsequent kidnapping were actually planned well in advance by Albert himself. And what happens next is documented in great detail in the book Confessions of a Macedonian Bandit, written by Albert himself. Now, this book reads much like a full-length Hollywood feature film. It follows the adventures and exploits of an American journalist traveling alongside the Macedonian rebel leaders as they complete their various missions and tasks throughout Macedonia. It starts in a tavern in Woden, then it takes you to the swamps of Karaferia, a autonomous rebel enclave in Aegean Macedonia. Then you follow the author to cities like Bitola, Resen, Presparigen, and then all the various villages that dot Aegean Macedonia. Along the way, you get to meet rebel leaders like Luka Ivanov, the personal guide to Sonnichsen himself. But you also get to meet more famous faces like Boris Sarafov, Damir Gruev, and Jane Sandanski. But moreover, you really get a feel for what the environment was truly like in 1900s Macedonia. It was, in a word, anarchy. For example, village burnings were a regular occurrence in Aegean Macedonia. Any village that moved away from the Greek church to join the exarchate or even aid the Macedonian rebels was subject to pillaging, plundering, if not full destruction by the Greek andarts sent all the way over from Athens. Here's an excerpt sent to the villagers by a Greek captain warning them not to renounce their faith. This is dated the 7th of February, 1906. We learn that you're being persecuted by the Bulgar brigands, who are trying to force you to renounce your Greek nationality and faith. We learn they're trying to force you to protest to the Europeans against the soldiers of faith, i.e. the Greeks, saying that we persecute you. I beg you to open your eyes. Make no more such protests in the future. I shall make it painful for those that do. Such we shall kill, their wives and children shall not be spared. We shall cut their limbs asunder. We kill all who do not join us. I hope you understand and will obey. Your brothers in faith, Konstantinos Akrita. Now, what's interesting about Sonnichsen's account is that it completely dispels the modern-day Greek myths about the existence of Macedonians. Whereas modern-day Greeks will never acknowledge the existence of a Macedonian-speaking minority within its borders, Greeks of the 1900s could hardly refuse to acknowledge such a fact, because back then, Slavic speakers were the overwhelming majority, not just in Aegean Macedonia, but Macedonia as a whole. This is a point that Albert continuously stresses throughout his book. But back then, Greeks did not view these Slavic speakers as these foreign invaders from behind the Carpathian Mountains that they needed to remove. Back then, they viewed them, for all intents and purposes, as Greeks. Greeks that had been brainwashed into believing they're Bulgarians and speaking Bulgarian. This is what they believed. And as I've stated numerous times before, back then one's identity had little to do with one's ancestry and origins. It had more to do with one's political and church affiliation. When the author arrives in his tavern in Vodun, yes, he called it Vodun, as most people did back then, as most Westerners did back then, heck, as even Greeks on postcards did back then, he noted the following. The landlord was supposed to be a Greek, but I observed that he addressed his servants in Bulgarian, and I learned later that he was no more Greek than I was. Of course, now it's important to keep in mind that this book was a product of its times. Albert lived at a time when Westerners carelessly assumed that the Macedonians and Bulgarians were one people, because back then nationality was determined on the basis of language and church affiliation. So of course, you're going to see the author refer to the rebels as such. But even by the early 1900s, we do begin to see the seedlings of the Macedonian national awakening. But this idea had not yet been readily accepted by the Westerners and the diplomats and the historians outside of Macedonia. But the lessons are nonetheless clear. Albert notes an overwhelming Slavic-speaking majority within Macedonia, and he sees the Greeks as nothing more than a small foreign influence unsuccessfully trying to vie for control and power in the region. This, at times, as Sonnichsen notes, amounted to Greek bishops quite literally telling, or I should say, terrorizing, non-Greek speaking villagers into renouncing their faith and admitting that they were, in fact, Greeks. Here's an excerpt. But the Greek bishop in Kataferia waved his hand hypnotically over them and said, "You are Greeks." They, in terror of the soldiers of the church, obediently responded, "We are Greeks," though even they could not utter this classic tongue, having to resort to the low barbarian jargon they spoke at home. But finally, you're going to see the real side to VMRO, raw, unfiltered, and uncut. And you may not like what you see necessarily, because today we have painted this idealized image of VMRO, of these brave and selfless comiti gallantly fighting for independent Macedonia. But oftentimes, that wasn't the case. As you'll see in Sonnichsen's accounts, VMRO was plagued from the beginning by the forces of disunity and haphazard efforts wherever they went. Not only was it overrun by career-seeking opportunists, fighting supposedly for Macedonia, but in reality for their own fame and fortune, but it also had individuals who were fundamentally at odds with the aims of the movement. In fact, it became so disorganized at times that it split into factions, and Westerners were commenting casually that it appeared to them that the committee were in fact killing more of their own people than they were the Turkish soldiers. And to add to this mess and confusion, there was also the occasional Macedonian that was still trying to cozy up and warm up to the Bulgarian government under King Ferdinand, and we all know how this ended for Macedonia. So was VMRO disorganized and disunified? Of course it was. But were there still heroes under the umbrella of VMRO? Absolutely. And in this book, you'll see people like Janez Sandanski as they speak unfiltered to the author himself. And you'll be able to judge for yourself who the true heroes were of VMRO instead of assigning guilt or praise to the organization as a whole. So to any student of Macedonian history that wants an exciting tale of an American adventurer traveling alongside the Macedonian rebels, as well as a sobering wake-up call to the problems that plagued us in the past and still continue to plague us to this very day, I cannot recommend this book enough. Like I said, it's raw and unfiltered, and every page of its contents transports you back to the chaos and turmoil that was 1900s Macedonia. As American author Mark Twain once stated, history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. Do yourself a favor, pick up this book, learn from the mistakes of our ancestors so we don't repeat them again today. Time is not on our side, and we need to learn from our mistakes. Well, that's our episode for today, folks. I'd love to hear what you thought of the book. Drop me a comment or an email and we can talk. But in the meantime, stay safe and keep fighting for Macedonia. Until next time.